this techno travesty and human tragedy reveals more than just the actual practical urgency of well thought out and appropriate safety regulation. It's literally exposing the jilted, sardonic, toxic cultural normalization of the glorification of an absence of human compassion and empathy. And we'll discuss that in depth. Welcome to News Breaking News, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled brainwashing in order to bring you News Breaking News, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, focused on curious, quirky, and quixotic news items that you may have missed during the last 48-hour news cycle. Hosted by me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Hello and namaste. Greetings, friends. And pardon me a moment as I'm struggling to fight back a little coughing fit. Before we dive into the depths of this week's breaking news story, breaking the news, as it breaks all over again, I'd like to send out to the world a pro tip, which I just forgot. I was struggling so hard to not let myself cough, because I totally just ripped a good one and I was about to keep hacking it up in that delicious good way. Pins on the corkboard. What was my pro tip about something? Wow. I forget. Never mind. Put an empty pin on the corkboard for a thought that might come back in the next 14 minutes as I ramble about stuff. So, friends, let's be clear about something. There's nothing wrong with comedy. I am most certainly never to be accused of being anti-comedy, anti-satire, anti-stand-up, or anti-freedom of speech in the performative fashion. I mean, my whole show is about my own weird, quirky, overthought, spirally, out of control, pseudo news commentary satire that doesn't really have any punchlines. Mostly because I don't have the staff required to do the legwork that most news shows do. Even the daily news shows, especially the daily funny news shows, a big group of people spend a lot of time putting together the construction of the comedy and the shows. I ain't got no staff to be doing that sort of thing. I just got to rely on my own absurdity and quick wit, which may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it might just be somebody's really fat hand-rolled blunt, which is all I aspire to, really. And you don't even have to be a 420 person to for that to work. I don't think. I digress. There's so much hubbub. So much hubbub on the internet, bub, about this sub They went down but didn't come up. And let me be clear about something. Human tragedy happens every day, right? Within, I think, 48 hours of this incident, there was a tragic loss of human life caught, on the sea, that devilish mistress, that about which there was next to zero hubbub on the interbubs relative to this, which is interesting, and we probably come full circle back to that. But in the cacophony of things being said, the points, the argument, the side, the perspective for which I would like to boost the volume on is that this was not caused by the people involved being evil elite overlords and deserving it. At least I don't think. I could be wrong, but that's one of those gooey reasons that doesn't have any need for actual hard facts, right? They had it coming to them just because they were wealthy, quote-unquote, elite enough to even have the resources at their disposal, in the disposable income category of their personal finances spread, to be able to afford this danger tourism deep dive trip. And I can understand the ego honey trap attractiveness of that kind of thinking. But it's also, in my humble opinion, exactly what I just called it. It's an ego honey trap of whatever the antithesis of cultivating human empathy could be described as. The exact inverse opposite. This is cultivating the rejection of common, basic human decency in the face of the loss of life on a class warfare mentality judgment level. Okay? And what's ironic to me, and this is where I mean it's doing more than just revealing the very real concern about safety. And while, yes, of course, there is corruption in government, therefore, i.e., obviously, there are some safety regulatory protocols that are probably on the unfair side or the toxic side or the abusive side or the, there's something unjust about something somewhere. But it's also, I think, in my humble opinion, kind of equally self-harmingly, self-underminingly immoral, toxic, and wrong to be so anti-regulation as to do crazy things like want to eradicate from the face of the earth everything that's been done under the efforts of the EPA, right? The Environmental Protection Agency Act was ushered into existence, if memory serves correctly, by the last Trumptopian president, a man who arguably helped mold and inspire, both directly and indirectly, the sort of vaudevillian villain politician-oriented self-aggrandizing, politically self-aggrandizing kind of self-serving thinking that is at the very center, the gooey, nuggety, irrational center of Trump's collectively co-created Trumptopian ideology. If there is to be some ideology to be identified through actual observation as opposed to empty political smoke blowing, right? Like, he has no authentically expressed, intellectually well-articulated political platform other than trolling his opposition, whoever it may be, and riling up the base to see, and poking that bear, ornery, how do you pronounce that? Friends from Texas? Ornery? Sleeping bear, to see how much damage it can, how much of a bull in a china shop impact it can have on the tug of war level of gotta win at all expenses, which is a very unhealthy, toxic way to conduct oneself and one's political business, in my humble opinion. And, one that I think has a strong tendency, and I don't want to overstep myself in making any declarative statements here, but it would seem rational to me to postulate in the theoretical that such behavior has a tendency to attract and or perpetuate corruptive corrosion of the ego mind variety that leads to the behavioral acting out of actual political corruption. I could be wrong, but I'm putting together my lived observations and my own internally processed critical thinking, and the results that doing my efforts on that, my deep thinky thoughts and meditative contemplative no thoughts, kind of what gets printed out after those processes are done. Here's my concern about this event. One of the spectrum of a cacophony, a cornucopia of cacophony of noise of human tragedy happening daily. And one can hyperfixate and or obliviate the meaning of all on each of these by the way one chooses to interpret and or judge societal reactions to the very news telling of this. And some of the reactionaryism out there in the social media spheres that I have access to on the platforms that I monitor and engage and dip my toes into. And it's tip of the iceberg engagement, right? Like I write, I comment far less than what I'm processing, folks. Whereas some people vomit everything out and think that they've been really clever. And I'm thinking of a particular ridiculous dead-end conversation I was having on one particular platform with one particular individual that I don't mean to invoke any shame about, but good grief. Like, trolling isn't that's the pro tip. Friends, if the content you're consuming has you spewing judgmental, irrational, hate speech riddled, and tauntingly pointless, dead end trolling hate speech at people, for the very sake of doing that, for the sake of doing it, you might want to question the integrity of that content, because that's known psyop operational, like, public manipulation tools. You're acting out. Like, I always say, hey, if you're really busy, like, calling people sheeple because they're brainwashed by something that you're full of hatred at and lots of hyper vilification content, to throw at the direction of whatever monolith of evil you've put on a plinth of blame, And tell me I'm just regurgitating some mainstream media outlet when I say things like that. And I laugh. Ain't no one talking like that on any legacy TV channel. So I should have my own show. I should have my own channel. But I digress. If you're doing that, friends, because of some content, because of some dogma, because of some preacher or prophet or political pontiff that has been pontificating, you might want to ask yourself, maybe you yourself are caught up in a little bit of the wagging tail, making the dog bark kind of sheeple-mongering, brainwashed, conditional behavior, reactionaryism yourself. Because that sounds like you're quacking like a duck. America's current echo chamber pop cultural norms are a living embodiment of the three-way Spider-Man pointing at each other's split. And that's, or if the not Spider-Man meme of like the two girls fighting and the one guy smoking weed and the other people all like freaking out about it was a Spider-Man meme. But that's way too complicated of a meme reference, I guess. I don't know if that either of those memes have names that are more commonly known. But the three Spider-Man meme variations, there are quite a few. I've made my own. But there's the two Spider-Man meme. There's two, there's a comic book image. I think it's taken not from a comic book, but from, it's a still image from a television, like Saturday morning cartoon show, like a classic legacy Spider-Man cartoon show from like before I was a kid watching Spider-Man stuff. I think, I could be wrong, but it's, and it's two dudes in Spider-Man costume. They both look like they could be Spider-Man, and they're pointing at each other. And in one way, it's the classic, like, which one do I evaluate to be the evil twin dilemma? But the postmodern meme, as I would put it, is that's the left versus the right, and the right versus the left. Whichever of the two Spider-Men you think is the good guy, the one that's like you're looking over the shoulder of, which a lot of people go with that one. Really depends on which label either one gets. And of course, I love the variant alternatives, and they step through their paces. There's the three Spider-Man variants of the meme bases there. But my use of the two Spider-Man variant is the right and the left pointing at each other, calling each other brainwashed political sheeple or puppets or whatever. When Americans accuse their fellow Americans of being brainwashed political zombies, I think is one way I might have put it in one iteration of the thought of the meme before I made the meme. I don't have the meme in front of me. There's also a three Spider-Man version of the image, which is used as a meme base. And that's left versus right, and then I just add conspiracy theorists as the third, and they create a perfect three-pointed circuit of equilateral finger pointing. We are all caught up in this hyper-normalized, double-barreled echo chamber system of multiple echo chambers. Right versus left is the echo chamber in which the people who have associated their personal identity with the right, the collection of rightist-leaning ideologies, and it's a big tent. They don't all necessarily agree with each other, or they don't all groove and vibe with each other. But I digress. this memification of this human tragedy is pointing out how equally popular and trendy it is to pat oneself on the back and be self-congratulatory about belittling the death of those who are judged unworthy of human sympathy, empathy, or compassion simply because of their wealth class status. Which is adorable and laughable because on either side of the left-right dichotomy, most of the people who will engage in the behavior of identifying with that kind of trolling, ridicule, and capitalization of the human tragic event to sling that insult at the generic, dehumanized, flattened out, vilified, projected class of human individuals by identifying with the caustic toxicity of the meme and resharing it enthusiastically in order to engage in helping to produce its popularity and trendiness and acceptability, right? That which we openly celebrate as normal, collectively, as communities, will be normalized, which is why we've normalized calling out what is getting normalized and encouraging and or promoting things to become normalized, right? Like, let's stop normalizing this and normalizing the other thing is a meme unto itself with many variants. So there's something to be concerned about there, folks, that objectively from like a high enough altitude, big picture, nonpartisan, I'm not involved, I'm not wearing a Spider-Man suit, and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just far enough back from everything in order to describe the scenery, the context, and the figures involved in the articulation of this gesturification, this cultural gesticulation going on, right? If we can call it that, if I can wordsmithy for you on the fly, real, raw, radically real, raw, and unscripted. However, wherever you want to put the radical, I mean it in the fun, groovy sense that we used it in the early 80s and 90s, before it got all flipped inside out and got, nasty. And, turned into militant talk. But I digress, I reel it back. I am not a radical, but I am radical, dude. On that note, friends, let's turn to my radical sidekick, the literary character, fictional, imaginary sidekick of mine, the dearest mechanical, androidical friend and compatriot, for I myself, in the literary sense, also am not from around these parts. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, pins on the corkboard. I don't actually think that I'm an alien from another planet, but I talk about it in joking terms like that. If I was doing stand-up, if I were a stand-up comedian, I would introduce myself as if I were a character out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like some long-separated camaraderie, compadre of Fort Prefect, who had also once, previously to this experience, spent a stint stuck on this delightful spinning orbital platform for birthing life that you all are toxically taking a big, rude, disrespectful dump in the mouth of. Right in the baby portal, actually. But I digress. That's pins on the corkboard. We've talked about that before. I was trying to introduce... Sorry, DJ Zed. DJ Zed is literally sitting in the corner giving me his most stoically subtle judgmental face of you totally spiraled way out of control there, bro, and completely forgot you were trying to introduce my next track. Have I played this recently? I sometimes I forget, and all the titles, and I hate saying this, and he's gonna elevate that judgy eyebrow a little bit, just the tiniest bit more. And I wish I had the right sound effect to tell you what that feels like when he does it, because it's not so much a sound as a subliminal vibratory vibe that it gives off that you flesh pods of meat and bone probably aren't attuned to, but oh man, they all start to sound like your titles, DJ Zed. And I worry that I literally might have just played this in the last episode that we put out, and I don't want to be redundant. And yes, I know we worked out a system for that. I just forgot what the system was, and I'm trying to remember. Here is recalibration. Recalibrating. Perfect take. Live to tape performance. And if I've recently played it, I apologize. But it's what I'm going to play. Enjoy as we talk into it a little bit about why I'm concerned about what this tragedy reveals about the cultural bell curve of what is and is not normal, quote unquote. Mind you, there's a caveat there with the word normal that you should take into consideration that we've discussed in depth on the show before. If you're not familiar, you need to find... There's got to be an episode with the word normal in the title, I think. And if there isn't, I'll need to dig it up and figure out which episode it is. For which I need an army of enthusiast fan listener assistants who will leave commentary on the episodes that they've listened to, new or old, comments with hashtags of keywords that they would find helpful in terms of oh, I want to listen to an episode where he touches on something, and some of the keywords can obviously be things on pins on the corkboard. The cycle of life, the birth, death, and rebirth of ideas. So much of that gets kind of old and tedious once you're aware of it from a certain vantage point, from a certain perspective. We'll talk about that. Boom. So, what I think is interesting and weird and fascinating is that just in the short span of time since this breaking news story broke the news, which is why we call the show what we call it, NBN. I'm not a news journalist, by the way, folks, and never have I ever pretended to be one. So don't come up to me rolling with fake accusations about how I pretend to be a journalist. I'm commenting on the trends I see in the public discourse at large, which is a sphere large enough to include both the content of legacy media, social media, and individuals who speak publicly about the trends in either and or both. I'm someone as such. So this event, no matter how you slice it, like when people die, it's sad. And yeah, even when they're jerks, I don't get people who revel in the Freudenschrade. I don't know if I pronounced that correct. It's that German word, right? When one takes a visceral pleasure in others' suffering, especially when it's someone's death and or potentially gruesome death. And I noticed if one were to make an imaginary Venn diagram, a lot of the people resharing the like dark versions of memes about this event and the individuals involved are also sort of, part of the overall crossover Venn diagram between people who are, self-identifying as like anti-elite, eat the rich types, the kind that jokingly talk quite casually about making guillotines popular again. And while, especially from a historical perspective, I understand the appeal, from a esoteric, transcendental, spiritual perspective, I also understand the profoundly deep obstacle and, of problematic issues involved with making that choice and advocating that path. Violence begets more violence, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Revenge is not justice. It is the forefather of vengeance, which brings about tyranny and repeats the cycle, creates a cycle, if I may be so bold. So it was in no way, shape, or form surprising, but it is, and I think I posit to you in terms of public discourse, should be something about which people agree and build majority consensus that it should be considered alarming, quote unquote, that so many, especially in the minority camp over there, that are the publicly self-identifying conspiracy theory types. And again, as always, disclaimer, I do not use that term judgmentally. I have my own conspiracy theories, which ironically, self-proclaimed conspiracy theorists who refuse to do any bit of looking into research, open-minded, critical thinking about my proposed conspiracy theorists spend a lot of time spewing hate speech and axiomatic, dogmatic thinking about how I'm wrong without even beginning to engage in intellectually examining and, as some gentleman language might have put it, entertaining what I had to say first. A true critical thinker is truly capable of examining, exploring, and this is a term of art, I would argue, entertaining a complex idea, ideological construct, point of view, perspective, political identity, etc., without buying into it and choosing to self-identify at a baseline identity level inferring it or endowing it with the power of belief. As in, one can understand a thing without choosing to believe in a thing. And arguably, there's some sanity there. And if that doesn't make sense, we'll need to step back and have a fundamental discussion about what we're actually trying to achieve at a deeper, philosophical level, about the function of big picture things like society at large. But I digress. The commentary that is trending about this seems to settle into lanes, right? As trendy trends do. And by that I mean there seems to be some common variables being expressed in multiple iterations, presumably coming from different sources. Although you can get to a nefariously paranoid enough perspective to argue that maybe there's a singularity of source there. But that's a whole pin on the corkboard issue. If we go spiraling out of control discussing that here, we'll never stick to the subject matter. Actually at hand, we'll go down a rabbit hole of other discussion. Put a new pin on the corkboard. Although there's proximity pins nearby of things we've already discussed in previous episodes. I wish I had a system, some sort of AI thing to do what I just brainstormed about, as if I had thousands of adoring fans listening to the show, and one small tiny percentage of which to willing to be part of my active fan club that helps me engage the rest of the audience on social media by doing fan club archival work, such as tagging episodes with specific hashtags that are fair and honest and accurate about what I've actually talked about in particular episodes. So that I can't, either or both would be awesome. Let's pray to the universe. Dear gremlins of the holographic universe, please bring that about into existence. Either and or both. Both would be awesome. So that, A, I would be able to exponentially grow my audience community, and B, this show will be that much more intellectually accessible to those looking at it as just a list. With some hashtag indexing, you'll be able to see where episodes interconnect, and be able to listen to and jump to places where they go, here's where you talked about this. As opposed to just going, I have no idea where you talked about this, and you have 7.5 years worth of content. You know what I mean? Amen. Okay, let's hope that manifests. What were we talking about? This event is, in and of itself, I would argue, I would like to throw out there into the gestalt for intellectual and interspiritual processing. This event, like all noteworthy current event things that create bellwether moments of public self-expression and iterative public, what do you call reposting of things? Because there are a lot of people reposting content that's often very self-congratulatory, which is, I find somewhat astonishingly ironic, if that makes sense. But this event has provoked quite a furious flurry of new memes, some of which flirt with truly evocative ideas that have been fomenting in fringy bits, edges of society throughout all of human history. And that, like I've already pointed out, some folks like to jokingly joke about. And there's nothing wrong with comedy. But there is something wrong with toxic behavior of all sorts, especially any form of manipulative provocation towards other people engendering problematic, toxic behavior, dressed up as comedy. There's something problematic with that. That is not merely comedy that is deserving of being defended under the banner of free speech, I would argue. Because when you're I'm just joking, kidding around online public discourse, clearly evolves into hate speech riddled with neurolinguistic prefabricated talking points that are alarmingly, increasingly provocative in their nature, thresholds have been crossed. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm saying that is something that statistically, historically, can be observed in the past as red flag warning issue behavior at a cultural level, right? There's no denying that there's corruption in the world. But there's also no denying that the obtuse, irrational, dehumanizing use of weaponized false accusation through innuendo and other forms of straw man argument, whataboutism, intellectually dishonest tactics. I mean, you're no longer in the same, sphere, right? And anyone truly intentionally trying to behave and engage in civic activities with some attempt at doing it with integrity should always be vigilant about that slippery slope trap. And if I may be so bold, folks, on both sides of whatever imaginary political ideological echo chamber spectrum aisle you can imagine, that the divided populace might align themselves around this event, there seems to be a component there which is explicitly about normalizing the dehumanizing disassociation and disenfranchisement of anyone and everyone with wealth. Now, I get it, right? I'm not naive enough to blind-faithedly believe that some magical half of all the powerful, wealthy people in the world are irrationally righteous and good. But it's funny to get that sort of innuendo or accusation implied at me or thrown at me overtly from people who are quite openly in some politicians' political camp wearing their merch and all. And perpetually donating money to them. Something, some behaviors that I categorically have avoided engaging in for the vast majority of my life. And I'm not trying to self-aggrandize. I'm just saying that's just a matter of fact. And there's something concerning, I would suggest, to the simple reality that everywhere you turn, at every tragic event or mysterious event or notorious event, there's this cornucopia of content that drives neurolinguistically manipulative language into people's minds that's entirely implicitly and explicitly about culturally normalizing some form of implied, insinuated, heavily biased antagonism towards a targeted enemy group. Whether it is the clique of wealthy elite and the cliche that they are all, deserving of being deposed of their power through cannibalism, and or French corporal murder punishment, which I find deeply problematic. As I've expressed before, in fact, I have an episode entitled "Fighting Evil with Evil is a Losing Fight." I find that deeply problematic, folks. I get joking. If you can be comedy, you want to make comedy based on the historical realities, sure. But let's deal with some historical realities. 10,000 years was the bloody, gory violence left and right. Everywhere you look. Societies, cultures, cities, states, nation states dealt with problematic leadership through violence and or controlling of the masses through violence. And yet here we are, not in a utopia of all problems solved and all toxic issues mitigated, but quite the opposite. Literally grappling with an ever-growing hyper-normalization of politicized violence and the promulgation, the proselytization. I never know how to pronounce that word, but it's a real word. The proselytization of people into a politicized and pseudo-religiously justified call to violent action. And if not violent action, unjustifiable, hateful action and unjustifiably hateful rhetoric, which is in and of itself a whirlwind, whirlpool, tornado, a perpetual motion machine of cultivating a mindset geared towards violence as its only intellectually identifiable tool. I don't know about you folks, but that's not the future I want to build. And it does not make any sense to me whatsoever when people pat themselves on the back and take pride in supporting, engaging, promulgating, propagating, perpetuating that kind of intellectually toxic vicious cycle behaviorally in the way they speak and in the content that they propagate and in the ideals that they absorb through that cycle, that feedback loop. Especially when it seems to be justified not by deep critical thinking, but by obviously broad yet toxically shallow, emotional, knee-jerk, reactionary response triggering, and not, which is sort of the opposite of real deep critical thinking, in my humble opinion. I could be wrong. I don't know. DJ Zed says I'm way past my time limit. I should be playing another DJ Zed track. So here it is, Deepening the Empty Space-Time Void. A Space Chill Step remix live to tape audio asset loop, engineering, improvised performance of digital bleeps and bloops to try and get you to get up and dance. Have we already played this one recently? I apologize if we have. I'm going to take them off our current playlist here in the studio if I have. But if you want to check out the latest and or the most recent, I don't know which is technically most accurate terminology, but whatever we've got going on SoundCloud, you can find that link by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, as well as all the other content creation publication platforms that are part of the nexus of content creating project circus that is what I casually reference with the term the Zeppoverse. For clarity, the issue I have is the dehumanization part. It just occurred to me that my commentary may lack clarity, especially depending on one's perspective. I don't care who gets targeted for dehumanization. It's the act of indulging in normalizing that I find concerning, right? Because the moment any one of us stoops to the same depths as those that we collectively argue are the quote-unquote bad guys, then how are we any different? And I really don't get people who embrace that with self-righteousness and say, so be it, when it gets pointed out to them. Right? And I've literally had those conversations. Not once, not a couple of times, more times than I can count in the past 35 years worth of having open-minded intellectual public discourse, both in real world situations, out and about in public, striking up conversations with people I've only just met, in a wide array and for assorted set of circumstances and surroundings, and as well as ever since I first joined the internet communities of people who surf the web. And mind you, I've been on the internet having conversations like these with juvenile-minded, snarky people that have nothing better to contribute to public discourse but juvenile snarkiness since before AOL launched. And now I'm not trying to sound better than anybody else. I'm just saying either we get busy solving the actual problems, folks, right? The solutions are not going to be found in any politicians, including Donald Trump's empty promises or saber rattling. None of the entertainments that are inherent in political tribalism as we know it today, especially post the Trumptopian infusion of everything Trump hypernormalized. None of that is going to discover out of political ether the solution to the realities of poverty, hunger, homelessness, disease, war, injustice, corruption, etc., 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 right? Like, the tug of war has its uses, and I'm not pretending that it doesn't. And it is currently kind of entrenched in the thinking of those who embody the system of society as we have inherited it, as we understand it to function today. There are problematic issues, but there are also things about it that work. And none of it is a monolith of either good or bad. So any content wrangling people like blind, angry cats down a slippery slope of biblical level dehumanization and demonization, hyper-vilification of targeted others, especially in the entrenched mental warfare of the pointless tug-of-war of a right versus left two-party dichotomous system that, like, it co-creates its uselessness, right? I've been calling it out, two wings, one bird. Whatever it is, no matter what arguments, no matter what threats, no matter how much they apparently are foaming at the mouth and clawing at each other's jugulars, the two political parties, as they have functioned since we inherited it in the post-Nixon era, it's mostly performative for the purposes of achieving political goals that are mostly tangible only to those engaging in the commerce of the political class system, dressed up as fighting for the little guy, right? Both sides right now, and this is a hard pill to swallow for most Americans with their hands on the tug-of-war rope. Especially those who think they're not playing the game whilst also busy tugging on the rope. Which, I get it. I kind of look like that's what I'm doing. I mean, I've been accused of that. People have repeatedly said, oh, look at you, how cute, you're still caught up in the two-party system. And I'm like, no, I'm commenting on the two-party system. But my record is quite clear. Never have I blind-faithedly defended anybody on either side of the two-party system, nor have I bought the merch from either side of the two-party system. Right? I haven't been drinking the Kool-Aid of the two-party system. I've been heavy-handedly, let's say in the past decade or so, heavy-handedly critiquing the right, well, actually more like 15 years, almost 20, the right wing of the bird of the one bird, because it's the one getting itself more in self-delusional trouble. I'm a little bit more worried about them than I am the folks on the left in terms of the overall act of realizing that we're all the bird. Right? We're all in a Spider-Man costume sitting around in a big giant ring of mutual finger pointing. And I include myself in that. In as much as that, like, no one is born outside of that, except for maybe, like, seriously, off-grid born people. People born to those who already were very deeply disengaged. But there's still a way in which they trap those non-involved. And that's by, manipulating them into an antagonistic position to everyone involved to the point of being useless. Like, what's my biggest critique? Anybody who's been listening to the show long enough knows that my biggest critique of the conspiracy theory movement is that they haven't actually fixed anything. Like, conspiracy theory, in one way, shape, or form or another, has almost always existed. Maybe not in podcast form, right? Maybe not in cultural memeified form, electrified, on e-media form. But like, we do the same things regardless of the platforms that we utilize to put with, like, it's all about the way we process our language and think. And one of the bitter pills to swallow there is that no matter how smart you are, you must remain always vigilant and critical of yourself first, or else you will be just as sheepily as any sheeple you're calling out, if you're calling out sheeple because the content that you're swallowing told you to, because your favorite politician told you to, because your favorite preacher told you to, because your favorite thought leader told you to. Don't you dare go out and call people sheeple and blame me for it. Because never have I ever said that. I'm sort of opposed to the whole name calling game to begin with, as it, in and of itself, has never solved anything. In the history of people calling each other whatever names, the only thing it provides is a dopamine rush to whoever is relishing the act of calling someone else a belittling name. But it has not, as a tool, as a societal tool, a cultural tool, an intellectual tool, name calling, finger pointing. Now, there is a threshold in which critical assessment and critique does contribute towards the collective work of acknowledging the flaws that help make the problems that we must solve, which leads us towards finding solutions. So the thing is, that threshold is specific and real and too often ignored. And when ignored, those who are ignoring it are trying to bring content on the wrong side of that threshold over to pretend that it's on the right side. But I digress. We've been rambling for quite a bit, friends. I'm not here to judge people who engage in or laugh at or with the snarky, judgy, what's another word for it? Spiky content out there. It was a bad situation on many levels. Oh, here's the thing that was irking me that I was starting to introduce somewhere near the beginning of the show that I spiraled out from really finishing the reference. One of the things that isn't talked about, because it's lost in the noise of all the sort of like short-sighted, myopic, just bully tactic stuff, which none of that is really like what are y'all contributing except a cheap laugh. And what are you missing out on? Here's my answer, right? Like, why did this event happen? To the best of the actual evidence that appears to be fact-based, from what I can tell, in my, limited ability, within that which is my constraints of real life, and I do not pretend to be a field researcher, I do not pretend to be an investigative journalist. I'm someone that dreams and aspires of being a fully funded job creator that can produce, hire people with those real world credentials and produce content that is informed in that way. But until that money comes along, I am only what I actually am, which is more of an idea guy. But here's my idea here. Hold on. I totally just lost the next mental image of where I was going to with my commentary, which is what I mean when I'm like, oh, the vocabulary filing card has failed to be retrieved. Based on what I am able to assess, and what does appear to be to be real facts on the ground, this tragedy, which it is, those people did not need to die. This was completely preventable, and judgments about those individuals' capacity to spend that level amount of money are kind of irrelevant in my book. I mean, there's a meaning to that discussion separate and before, independent of the tragedy, right? But now, if we want to get to the real, if there's any justice to be had in this situation, real justice, not trolling, hate-filled, spiteful, owning you, imaginary justice, it's to be found in a legitimate investigation into the technical cause of the failure. This submarine, was not a household name last week. Although I'm sure in a few weeks' time, and this is me sort of calling out a pattern in the conspiracy theory community, in a few weeks' time, there will be people reposting content they were spoon-fed by corporate algorithms that is self-congratulatory about knowing all along and maybe even predicting the real cause of this event. Even though I'm telling you right now in real time, a week ago, there was nothing on my social media radar, and it's not as deep and nor as wide as it could be and or might be, should be, if I were a fully produced, bankrolled thing that I envision this show of being. But I digress. I'm going to find it really hard to believe right here at this juncture that there was anyone talking about this other than those actually involved in the trends and nuances of the nerdly culture of the industry itself, of which there might be some folks that aren't firsthand involved, but that's sort of like industry insider stuff. The people who were actually speaking out about the problems involved with the experimental issue. But here's the part that's sort of like, oh, isn't it cute that this is not being really addressed by all those with an instant and often very caustic opinion about this situation. And that's that the reason the submarine imploded, to the best of my understanding, is because the sort of self-appointed creator was a sort of the CEO of the company, the self-proclaimed genius. Well, I don't know that he actually ran around proclaiming himself a genius, the way, for example, Donald Trump literally has, despite failing to ever actually behave like a true genius. The self-proclaimed innovator, because he was that, he literally did claim to be doing what he was doing for the sake of innovation and pushing the envelope in an important and, I guess, supposedly meaningful way. But he was, as the classic hubris-themed parable of Icarus warns, like, too full of his own confidence to realize what danger he was exposing himself to. So this submarine not being super household common name as of a month ago, surprisingly, had made the trip multiple times already, despite being quite genuinely as janky as the memes make it out to be, which I wasn't certain about, until I was able to confirm. It's funny how I saw the memes before I saw other sources confirming the information that it was literally. I mean, when I saw the guy, may he rest in peace, who was driving it, literally say in some media interview from a few years back that they drove the thing with a third-party video game controller. Setting aside whatever judgment any people may have about the adventure tourists, or the citizen explorers, which I guess is according to some self-proclaimed authorities on the matter. It's funny because those who are that are also profoundly wealthy people who do things by the seat of their pants and because they have the money to afford to do it. But setting all that aside, they didn't deserve to die on what is effectively a joyride to go look at a thing somewhere cool. They didn't deserve to die. I mean, and I get it. They all signed an end user license agreement that explicitly warned them that they were engaging in very risky activity that could quite probabilistically and believably include, their own life meeting its end. And I don't know what to say about people who read that and sign it, other than wow, then they don't deserve to be shamed publicly, because if they truly read it and truly understood it and signed it anyway, that takes some brass, and or blissful ignorance, right? But no one deserves to be presented with a EULA like that and also reassured what may have been kind of smarmy, salesmanshipy, manipulative, car salesman kind of way, which has a lot, those sorts of tactics are often very neuro-linguistically manipulative, that there was nothing to worry about. Smacking the side of the experimental bathtub, and to say, oh, we'd made this trip a bunch of times, but not acknowledge that the variable is stress over time. Right? That was the hubris. That was the wax melting off the wings. For those of you who can follow the very loosely strung together analogy about the parable. This CEO cut corners, bragged about cutting corners, actively spoke out against safety regulation as an unnecessary burden to quote-unquote business innovation, and immorally cut corners in order to improve the bottom line in such a way that is arguably, given the net end result, ultimately to be judged as hubris, foolish, and immoral. He should have, that individual, whose name I don't have in front of me, so it's not, I've heard it a bunch of times in the past couple of days, seen it on screens and articles, in text. Can't remember what it is for the life of me. Mean no disrespect. I apologize. That's just the way my brain works, and this show is very real, raw, and radically unscripted. Right? Speaking to you with, from a Zen-like, straight from the heart. I've got all my screens turned off so I can just go with the flow. The buck ultimately stops with him and rests on his shoulders and the corporate interests that bolstered him, empowered him, enabled him, and did not put checks and balances and obstacles in his way. His partners at a corporate level and in all the ways that, the corporate participants of that endeavor, from the board members on down. And I know that there were whistleblowers or those who could be characterized as such, and employees that left out of a deep sense of frustration and concern for the disregard and safety, etc. Now, I don't want to hyper-vilify him. It's clear, and when I say hubris, right, I don't mean evil. I mean foolish self-confidence to the point of being self-undermining and blinding. Like toxically self-undermining and self-blindering. To be so full of an underdeserved confidence as to risk your own life and take other people's money to put their lives at risk. It's an ignorance taken beyond, the pale to the point of being maliciously, criminally, immorally negligent, in my humble opinion. And if it had been any other set of circumstances wherein he got messed up but survived, and everybody else suffered the consequences of losing their lives, I would intellectually be on the side arguing that he owes a debt to society and to the survivors of those individuals whose lives he put at risk, right? Like if this were like an airplane situation where he was flying an experimental, self-engineered, self-produced, self-assembled airplane into dangerous, inherently risky locations and or climactic conditions and charging an arm and a leg for it and survived a horrible, disastrous crash, I would be totally comfortable encouraging the survivors of those family members and the civil authorities taking that person to task, despite the personal tragedy of his own pain and suffering. It's like, if you're going to pretend to be an innovator, if you're going to play that game, because it is all a big game, right? The way we run our economic engines, and that includes the spaces or the fields or marketplaces in which we do innovative engineering research and then monetize it as a form of of thrill-seeking tourism, etc. There must be boundaries. Some of the same people taking zero pity at the lost lives and taking the piss in the faces of those who have just died, and or insinuating that it's conspiratorially all fake news and staged and part of some broader deception, also happen to be, curiously, members of the same Venn diagram overlap of those who bend over backwards to fight in the political arena for the politicians who are themselves bending over backwards to initially defend and sanctify and whitewash and hypernormalize and deepen, broaden, and expand the boundaries of the immoral corporate rights to profiteering at the expense of others in ways that are obviously toxic. They are those who push the irrational hyper-deregulation narrative talking points. The people who say they're out to tame big government by joining big government and then pushing on the levers of big government in ways that seem just like the big government they hyper-vilified and accused of being responsible for all the problems that the little guys are suffering. Right? Like, you can't, I don't think you're being intellectually honest with yourself and others and your civic responsibility to your fellow neighbors and members of this society, of many societies. Right? Are we being truly honest with ourselves and our fellow Americans if, on the one hand, we blindly adore and justify the toxic behavior of one billionaire trying to abuse the system for their own immoral power, advantage, and profiteering, and then also mock, ridicule, and belittle another millionaire and or billionaire, and I don't know where his economic status actually stood at an individual personal level, but the guests were all of wealthy class, enough that they could afford to, pay whatever it was, $250,000, $500,000 for these tickets to go down on this thing in this submersible object, which was fraudulently presented to them, right, because of the self-samely toxic, self-aggrandizing ideological dogma of right-wing, pro-corporate, toxic free market capitalism, pseudo-religious Christian nationalism that is the nexus of conflicting and all very problematic, toxic ideological things that are all bound by the tent over there. Now, are there problematic ideologies running around amok under the leftist tent? Of course there are. Do they all, though, pretend to be anointed by the power of Christ himself? No. And I digress. The problem is that there's a much more problematic inherent hypocrisy in what I'm pointing out here on the right end of the spectrum, which is to embrace a golden idealized ideologue champion. And I chose those words quite specifically because they literally made a golden idol of him. He is sort of like a fake golden tan spray thing going on. And he is an ideologue, and he wants to I think he's trying to create his own Trumptopian ideological cultural construct. And I don't say that with inherently mindless negative bias, but it is what it is. And it's not rendering a lot of positive, utopian, uplifting behavioral results, is it? In the 60 years that I've seen the postmodern conspiracy theory movement grow, expand, and condense and become hyper-normalized and settle in the MAGA, Trump, GOP spectrum of the Venn diagram of overlapping identities over there, which include pseudo-religious white nationalism, although aren't explicitly just that all the way through. But they're definitely in bed together, yo. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We'll pretend that we're not. You can claim us, and we won't acknowledge you, and it's all fine and good. Plausible deniability, etc., etc. And toxic denialism, etc., etc. Pins on the corkboard. We've done some talk about that before in the show. We need to come full circle and do a specific episode about weaponized, toxic, denialist trolling. But if there's a fire to put out urgently before it becomes an unstoppable conflagration that burns down everything else that may or may not already have other problematic structural issues going on, it's that, in my humble opinion. And it's laughable to see them take no pity against one toxic corporate millionaire or potential billionaire and simultaneously bend over backwards to bury their head in the sand in a blind faith, circle the wagons, defend him at all costs, over another toxic, corrupt, pretends to be a millionaire, right? He's a millionaire that claims to be a billionaire and probably isn't really a true billionaire. And isn't a lot of things that he claims to be. But one thing that this guy who ran this submarine company was an engineer. Right? Like, Trump is not any of the things that he pretends to be. Not the least of which is a stable genius. He isn't either of those two things. And it's quite clear and obvious to anyone from a far enough back perspective. But the critical problem to me is that this tragedy with this submersible was obviously preventable if in our society we hadn't just spent 30 years hyper-normalizing this blasé, fair, no fucks to give, and yet let's fuck around and find out ain't nothing gonna go wrong because I'm a special golden genius child of entitled capacity based on, wealth and not necessarily earned, authenticated, structural integrity, right? That submarine imploded because it lacked the structural integrity necessary for to cope with and mitigate the long-term wear and tear impacts involved in and implicit, like inescapably unavoidable part of the journey of going up and down to those depths as often as they did. And I don't have the number in front of me, but it was more often than I realized when I first heard the story, right? I heard experimental, newly constructed, and I thought this was the second time it had gone down to, it's been, more than a handful of times. Plenty of people went down there successfully and nothing bad happened. The combination of those initially successful runs and the compound interest of the blind faith in his own corporate hubris and entitlement. I'm entitled to cut corners and scoff at safety regulations and disregard safety certification protocols because I magically know that my engineering knowledge is inherently superior enough to be assumed safe? I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's the first thing that would be out of my mouth, straight eyeball to eyeball, if someone I knew in real life were to pitch me that idea, or make the argument in defense of that idea if it weren't, immediately their own actual. Like if I had known this guy in real life, like if I happened to be closer to his tax bracket and we happened to be drinking buddies or bowling buddies or whatever, we happen to maybe I'm not anywhere near closer to his income tax bracket, but we happen to both go to the same library or something, right? I mean, rich people go to libraries too, right? Maybe they don't. Maybe they just buy whatever publishing house they need to acquire the books that they want that are hard to get. I don't know. But if I had, through whatever circumstances would have been necessary, the sort of, intellectual bend his ear private access to advise him, I'd be like, bro, that's a recipe for disaster. Like, test the safety tests and pass the safety protocols, because the last thing you want to do is die and cause the death of others out of a blind faith disregard for those things. Because you will ruin whatever legacy contribution you might have otherwise been able to make to the innovation of this field of extreme exploration that he obviously, truly, genuinely wanted to contribute in, right? Whatever else you can critique him for, and here's the thing that annoys me, there's people taking criticism beyond the pale. And I'm sure, given the way the conspiracy theory industry machine behind the scenes actually works, there will soon be people taking, character assassination beyond the scope of reality. He will, if he is not already being called or being inculcated with and or assumed to be associated with or a part of the evil lizard and or robot and or alien monster, baby-eating, brain-sucking overlords from another planet and or another dimension, he will be in the not-too-distant future. This is one of those things that will either be quickly, completely forgotten by the conspiracy theory community, or will in perpetuity continually be rebranded, recycled, repurposed, and will occasionally, like in a cyclical fashion, resurface as some aha, gotcha conspiracy theory expose of the evil overlord's plans to destroy us all. When all that really happened, it would seem, based on the things that I know to be actual facts on the ground, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I would love for some truly transparent and truly capable investigation into the situation to bring these facts into clarity, was corporate hubris and a little bit of human ego and pride and greed all coming into play in the bad decision-making of a wealthy and presumably powerful position, powerful man's thinking in the position to be the chief executive officer of a company doing exactly, what this company was doing, which is trying to make a profit by cutting corners in the development of some sort of new modality of luring people into paying for the privilege of being taken somewhere no other outfit really has a ready to go solution for, like, boom, we can take you there. There's submarine ventures that could take you to the Mariana Trench, but none of them are ready to commercially do it on the daily or whatever it is that these guys were doing it on the week to week, or at least they aren't offering. Maybe they don't see the marketplace that these guys thought they saw, but I digress. Not seeing any evidence that could explain any other reason for this happening, at least not yet. And not being myself in a position to go down there and look, right? I can only stand and call out with skepticism and the banner of questioning everything that we should not fall victim to the aspersion casting, normalization of, like, dehumanizing others and de-empathizing, the empathetic disconnecting of others who have suffered great loss, right? No matter how you slice it, people died. And that causes great pain to those who those individuals are related to. And those people might have been not millionaire, billionaire type people if situations were different. And ultimately, like, there's a sort of dead-endedness to just relishing in the Schmeidengras, or whatever that German word is, in the sort of pointless taking of greedy dead-end joy in this loss of life, Freudenschade, whatever it is. You either know the word I'm referencing or you don't, but this is clearly going on out there. And it's always defended as something defensible by the free speech of public comedy. But there are toxic seeds being planted there, folks. And with all due respect, if we don't call out those toxic seeds, then aren't we sort of complicit in the cultivating of the toxic fruit those seeds will ultimately bear? And that's what I got to say about that, folks. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I've been your humble host, the incorrigible Master Zeppo, and this has been a much longer than anticipated episode of News Breaking News.
And that is the latest News Breaking News. We now return you to your regularly scheduled brainwashing. Thank you for listening.
I think I just had an image for a meme that concisely expresses something I've been seeking a concise expression for. I have to use these are the same image or picture meme base and put manipulative mainstream media content and manipulative conspiracy theory content on the two calling cards or flashcards that what's her name from The Office. It's from The Office, right? That meme base, the character in that meme base is from. Yeah, I gotta go. I'm probably gonna turn around and completely forget that I just had that thought and never make the meme. And since this tape was still rolling, that's why I captured it. But yeah, folks, peace out. Go be good human beings, not opposition-owning trolls.